Hi, Mr. Monastra, here to read you Chapter 7, titled A Visitor and a Visit. The next day was bright and sunny, which I normally like. Last night I had wished for another rainy recess so I could study the new students a little more. But the sunshine helped me think of another verse to write in my notebook. Autumn, oh autumn, when the weather turns funny. One day it's cold and rainy, the next day it's warm and sunny. I don't believe Mrs. Bizbrain thought it was funny when Hurry Up Harry arrived a few minutes after the bell rang. This time he brought his mom with him. She looked very worried as Mrs. Bizbrain greeted her. Mrs. Bizbrain, I'm so sorry. After you called last night, I promised myself I'd get Harry here on time. But then I had to stop for gas, she explained. Tomorrow I'll get him here on time. Thanks, Mrs. Ito, said Mrs. Bizbrain, answering politely. Then she turned to Harry. Why don't you go to your seat and take out your language arts workbook, she said. Ugh. Did you hear that? I squeaked to my neighbor. When Mrs. Ito had left and the students were all working, Mrs. Brisbrain called Harry's mom last night to talk to her about him being late. Boing, boing, og. Loudly replayed, which made some of the kids laugh. That's serious, I said. I hope she wasn't too upset. When I looked over at Harry, he didn't seem upset at all. The bell rang for recess later in the morning, and the students rushed out of the room. I knew they'd be getting their wiggles out on the playground, so I decided to try some of those exercises Mrs. Bizbrain had taught us the day before. I wiggled my ears and my whiskers and even jiggled my tail, something else humans cannot do. Then I shook my whole body, trying to shake my problems away. Rockin' Humphrey, I squeaked. I guess I looked a little silly, but I felt good. I felt even better when I heard a familiar voice say, Humphrey, what are you doing? I looked up and saw a wonderful sight. Golden Miranda and Speaking Up Say. Two of my best friends from last year were standing by my cage, smiling down on me. I think he's dancing, Say said in her beautiful soft voice. We miss you so much, Humphrey, Miranda said. I'm sorry. You have George in your classroom, I squeaked. If only she could understand me. We miss you too, Ugh, said Say agreed. George doesn't like you, but we do. It's not the same without you, Miranda leaned in very close and whispered. I love you, Humphrey. I was a little worried that Ugh might feel left out. But Miranda leaned in close to his tank and said, You too, Ugh. My heart did a little somersault inside me. Golden Miranda still loved me, and I loved her back. Girls, Mrs. Wright will be looking for you, Mrs. Bizbrain said. She always knows when someone's missing from the playground. They laughed and promised to come see me again. The rest of the day I tried very hard to concentrate on what the teacher said. But no matter what she said, I kept hearing Miranda's voice saying, I love you, Humphrey. Later, Mrs. Bizbrain made an announcement. Class, I'll be taking Humphrey home this weekend. Starting next Friday, he'll start going home with different students each week. I was a little bit relieved not to be going home with any of the new students, since I still don't know them very well. However, I am a very curious hamster, so I couldn't help wondering what weekends at their houses would be like. Mrs. Brisbrain lived in a yellow house with her husband Bert. After an accident last year, Bert was now in a wheelchair. He spent a lot of his time in his workshop making birdhouses. He made a big extension for my cage, too. Thanks. He also worked part-time at Maycrest Manor, a place where people get better after an accident or an illness. Sometimes he took me there to help. It's pretty quiet at the Bizbrain's house, especially compared to some houses, which are filled with kids and pets. Sometimes it's a little too quiet, and I miss Ugh. I dozed a lot that weekend. I napped while Mrs. Bizbrain tidied up the house. I slept while she went over students' papers, and I snoozed while the Bizbrains went out on Sunday morning. I was certainly resting up when Mrs. Bizbrain opened my cage on Sunday afternoon and said, "Humphrey, you must be bored to tears. I haven't paid a bit of attention to you this weekend, but that's changing now." She scooped me up and put me into my yellow plastic hamster ball. "How about a change of scenery?" she asked. It sounded unsqueakably nice to me. She carried me out to the garage where Mr. Bizbrain was hammering away on a piece of wood. "I thought you might like some company," Mrs. Bizbrain told her husband. "Always do," he said. Mrs. Bizbrain sat in an old stuffed chair near the workbench and put my hamster ball on the ground. My hamster ball didn't have flashing lights or music, but I still liked it. "Go take a spin, Humphrey," she said. "You need the exercise." I started the ball rolling. Things looked different from inside the ball, and they sounded different too. When the Bizbrains talked, they sounded as if they were underwater, but I could still hear what they were saying. "Bert, may I ask you a personal question?" she said. He chuckled. "We've been married for 30 years, Sue. I think you can ask anything you want." "Okay. What's the worst thing about being in a wheelchair?" she asked. Bert thought for a few seconds. "I can't reach the box of candy you hid on the top shelf in the kitchen." Mrs. Bizbrain laughed. "I put it up there so I can't reach it either." Then Bert got more serious. "People are the worst part of being in a wheelchair," he said. "Why?" Mrs. Bizbrain asked. "Well, I don't like it when people treat me as if I'm different. I'm no different just because I'm sitting in a chair. I'm the same person I always was," he explained. His wife nodded. "That's true. And I don't like it when people try to help me when I don't need help," Bert continued. "But you can't blame people for wanting to help," Mrs. Bizbrain said. "I appreciate help when I need it, and I know I have to ask for it sometimes, but some people just won't leave me alone, like Violet Rossman next door. If I'm outside for 1 minute, she runs over to see if she can help. She really gets my goat." Mrs. Bizbrain laughed quietly. "You have changed a bit since you've been in the wheelchair, Bert Bizbrain. You're as stubborn as ever." "It's called independent," he said, chuckling. Bert began running a piece of sandpaper over a piece of wood. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, there's this girl in my new class, Rosie. She's in a wheelchair," Mrs. Bizbrain said. "She's very independent, too." "That's good," Bert said. "Yes, but she's not the problem. It's another girl," Mrs. Bizbrain sighed. "Something else, Bert. She said, when you were a boy and you were really short." Mr. Bizbrain smiled and nodded. "Yep. Until 1 year, when I went from being the shortest boy in the class to the tallest boy in the class. It happened over the summer. Quite a change." "Which did you like better? Being short or being tall?" Mr. Bizbrain stopped sanding the wood. "I guess there were problems either way." "That's what I was thinking too," his wife said. "Me too," I squeaked, rolling my ball closer to the chair. "Oh, Humphrey, I almost forgot about you, Mrs. Bisbrain laughed. No one could ever forget Humphrey, Bert said. Humphrey won't be here next weekend, Mrs. Bisbrain said. He'll be going home with a student from my new class. Which one? Mr. Bisbrain asked. Yes, which one? I squeaked. I'm not sure yet, Mrs. Bisbrain said. We stayed out in the garage for a while, but the Bisbrains talked about other things I didn't understand. As I rolled around the garage, I tried to imagine Mr. Bisbrain as a little boy. It was hard. And then I tried to imagine Mrs. Bisbrain as a little girl. That didn't work either. Maybe hamsters just don't have good imaginations. Humphrey's rule of schools. Everybody has problems, not just